We're on to chapter 19 of A Course in Miracles. This chapter is called The Attainment of Peace. And we're on to section 3 today, which is the unreality of sin. The attraction of guilt is found in sin, not error. Sin will be repeated because of this attraction. Fear can become so acute that the sin is denied the acting out. But while the guilt remains attractive, the mind will suffer and not let go of the idea of sin. For guilt still calls to it, and the mind hears it and yearns for it, making itself a willing captive to its sick appeal. Sin is an idea of evil that cannot be corrected and yet will be forever desirable. As an essential part of what the ego thinks you are, you will always want it. And only an avenger with a mind unlike your own could stamp it out through fear. The ego does not think it possible that love, not fear, is really called upon by sin and always answers. For the ego brings sin to fear, demanding punishment. Yet punishment is but another form of guilt's protection, for what is deserving punishment must have been really done. Punishment is always the great preserver of sin, treating it with respect and honoring its enormity. What must be punished must be true. And what is true must be eternal and will be repeated endlessly. For what you think is real, you want and will not let it go. An error, on the other hand, is not attractive. What you see clearly as a mistake, you want corrected. Sometimes a sin can be repeated over and over with obviously distressing results, but without the loss of its appeal. And suddenly, you change its status from a sin to a mistake. Now you will not repeat it, you will merely stop and let it go unless the guilt remains. For then you will but change the form of sin, granting that it was an error, but keeping it uncorrectable. This is not really a change in your perception, for it is sin that calls for punishment, not error. The Holy Spirit cannot punish sin. Mistakes he recognizes and would correct them all as God entrusted him to do. But sin he knows not, nor can he recognize mistakes that cannot be corrected. For a mistake that cannot be corrected is meaningless to him. Mistakes are for correction, and they call for nothing else. What calls for punishment must call for nothing. Every mistake must be a call for love. What then is sin? What could it be but a mistake you would keep hidden, a call for help that you would keep unheard and thus unanswered? In time, the Holy Spirit clearly sees the Son of God can make mistakes. On this you share his vision. Yet you do not share his recognition of the difference between time and eternity. And when correction is completed, time is eternity. The Holy Spirit can teach you how to look on time differently and see beyond it, but not while you believe in sin. In error, yes, for this can be corrected by the mind. But sin is the belief that your perception is unchangeable and that the mind must accept as true what it is told through it. If it does not obey, the mind is judged insane. The only power that could change perception is thus kept impotent, held to the body by the fear of changed perception, which its teacher, who is one with it, would bring. When you are tempted to believe that sin is real, remember this. If sin is real, both God and you are not. If creation is extension, the Creator must have extended himself, and it is impossible that what is part of him is totally unlike the rest. If sin is real, God must be at war with himself. He must be split and torn between good and evil, partly sane and partly insane. For he must have created what wills to destroy him and has the power to do so. Is it not easier to believe that you have been mistaken than to believe in this? While you believe that your reality or your brother's is bounded by a body, you will believe in sin. While you believe that bodies can unite, you will find guilt attractive and believe that sin is precious. For the belief that bodies limit mind leads to a perception of the world in which the proof of separation seems to be everywhere, and God and his creation seem to be split apart and overthrown. For sin would prove what God created holy could not prevail against it, nor remain itself before the power of sin. Sin is perceived as mightier than God, before which God himself must bow and offer his creation to its conqueror. Is this humility or madness? If sin is real, it must forever be beyond the hope of healing. For there would be a power beyond God's, capable of making another will that could attack his will and overcome it, and give his Son a will apart from his, and stronger. And each part of God's fragmented creation would have a different will, opposed to his, and and in eternal opposition to him and to each other. Your holy relationship has, as its purpose now, the goal of proving this is impossible. Heaven has smiled upon it, and the belief in sin has been uprooted in its smile of love. You see it still because you do not realize that its foundation has gone. Its source has been removed, and so it can be cherished but a little while before it vanishes. Only the habit of looking for it still remains. And yet you look with heaven's smile upon your lips and heaven's blessing on your sight. You will not see sin long. For in the new perception, the mind corrects it when it seems to be seen, and it becomes invisible. Errors are quickly recognized and quickly given to correction to be healed, not hidden. You will be healed of sin and all its ravages the instant that you give it no power over your brother. And you will help him overcome mistakes by joyously releasing him from the belief in sin. In the holy instant, you will see the smile of heaven shining on both you and your brother, and you will shine upon him in glad acknowledgement of the grace that has been given you. For sin will not prevail against a union heaven has smiled upon. Your perception was healed in the holy instant heaven gave you. Forget what you have seen and raise your eyes in faith to what you now can see. The barriers to heaven will disappear before your holy sight, for you who were sightless have been given vision, and you can see. Look not for what has been removed, but for the glory that has been restored for you to see. Look upon your Redeemer, and behold what he would show you in your brother, and let not sin arise again to blind your eyes, for sin would keep you separate from him, but your Redeemer would have you look upon your brother as yourself. Your relationship is now a temple of healing, a place where all the weary ones can come and rest. Here is the rest that waits for all after the journey, and it is brought nearer to all by your relationship. Okay, the unreality of sin. Jesus is continuing in this chapter to talk a lot about sin and the difference between sin and error. Another way of saying error is mistakes. Now, keep in mind that there is the original error, right? The original error was it's that whimsical, capricious idea of the tiny mad idea. Could we be separate from God? What would that look like if the Son of God was separate from God, the Creator of all? Now, that is an impossibility. That's an impossible proposal. But because it is the will of the Son, and the Son shares God's creative power, in a way, it's not creative. It's not creative. It's destructive. But but because of that, the idea took form and became a whole world, a whole universe of separation. Okay, this is the metaphysics of the Course, basically. But the reality was that was all a dream. This was all a fantasy that the Son was having. It was kind of like a daydream, right? The Grateful Dead, Box of Rain. This is all a dream we had one afternoon long ago. This is just a dream that the Son dreamed. And in that dream, that was the original error, was that tiny mad idea. Now, whenever we see sin, guilt, and fear, we make that original error real. Whenever we make those things real in our mind, I don't know why this video is doing this. It keeps going. Maybe I need to stay back here a little bit. Whenever we make that original error real in our mind, we basically give energy to the ego thought system. And the project before us with A Course in Miracles is to show that the ego is really nothing, and that we can live without the ego. That we can, even in this world, we do not have to follow the ego. This is actually a very big proposal. This is a very big project in a sense, because most people think, well, I need my ego. The ego protects me. The ego is my friend. And this is more the idea that no, ego ain't your amigo. It's not your enemy either. You don't want to kill the ego, because that just makes the ego real. Whenever you fight against the ego, it just makes it that much more real and that much more serious. Rather, Jesus is here giving us the way to put one over on the ego. Not really. No, just to dissolve the ego, to show that it is that light mist in front of the sun, and it's really nothing. Although there might seem to be dark clouds, but it's really, the ego really is very flimsy when it comes down to it. And Jesus basically showing you how the whole house of cards can easily fall apart, right? It's a castle made of sand. It's a tempest in a teacup, basically, is what the ego is. Now, how do you turn the tables on the ego? Here's how you do it. You stop making others guilty. Stop making yourself guilty. You stop thinking in terms of sin, that things are so serious, and that things, there are certain things that are unforgivable, and that there's certain things that you could never countenance, certain things that you could never abide in a million years, right? And obviously there are things that we can forgive. We do it all the time. We let things go. But there are certain things that we can't. And Jesus is here to tell us the first miracle principle, which is there's no order of difficulty in miracles, meaning if you can forgive one thing, you can forgive everything, because it's all part of this ego thought system. So which is nothing. So you really, ultimately, you have to be able to forgive everything. And that is a very, very tall order when you're faced with, let's take the Israel-Hamas war with that's happening right now. We're in the 4th week of it. When you're faced with children being killed, women raped, tortured, children tortured, burned, bombs dropped on children, etc., etc., when you're faced with those things, it's very hard to find any of that forgivable, to find any, that becomes very serious, and that's where people get into a lot of anger and upset. And Jesus is telling us, if Jesus were a person coming to tell us, he would be crucified. But it's a book, it's a disembodied Jesus now. So you can't kill him. You can only throw the book at the wall. But he's saying to you, yeah, you can forgive all of this. You can understand that all of this is really a call for love. All of this are just mistakes born out of ignorance that people make. And we all make our mistakes. We all, it may not take the form of torture, rape, pillaging, all these horrible things, but we all, in a sense, if you want to put it this way, we're all guilty of that. But Jesus is saying, no, well, that's true, that we all have, we've all sinned against our brother and against ourselves and against God. But Jesus is saying but that's not true. I mean, it looks that way. From where we are on this side of the veil, that's what it looks like. And it's very hard not to see it that way. Very hard not to, see guilt, fear, shame, Some people need to go to hell. Some people need to be killed. Some people need to be obliterated from the face of the earth. That's how we feel when we see these things. And when we, if you just look at what's happening in the world right now with attacks on people's views. And if you're certain, if you're Jewish or if you're Palestinian, watch out. The pro-Palestinians are going to get the Jews, and the pro-Israelis are going to get the Arabs, et cetera, et cetera. So Jesus is saying, all right, let's all calm down here. This is not, even though it looks horrible, even though it's devastating, tragic from our point of view, but from the standpoint of love, everything is it's only two things. It's either love, an extension of love, or it's a call for love. Or you could say it's merely, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. It's ignorance, human ignorance. What are we ignorant of? We are ignorant of what we are. If we knew that we are love, we would not attack. We would not kill. We would stay in our peaceful, loving state, and we would and everything that we would do ultimately would emanate from that place within ourselves. But because we do not know what we are, we act out from a place of ego. And it's not sinful when we do those things. It's just these are mistakes that can be corrected, not sins that we need to be punished for. That's a very big, huge shift that Jesus is presenting here. I mean, if you just look at everything in that light, it's a complete game changer, right? Everything, right? Because we some things, we don't give some things the status of a mistake. Some things are very, very egregious. Some things are very, very serious. We will never forgive those things. No matter what, that person we could never forgive. If you just think of, the people that you might think that way, including the people closest to you, your relatives, siblings, mother, father, Hitler, Benjamin Netanyahu, I don't know, whoever it might be, that's where you have to say, you have to look at it from the light of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, which is, it's either love or a call for love. It's not, there's no evil, there's no sin, unless you interpret it that way. And Jesus is saying, you don't have to. You don't have to interpret it that way. You can interpret it, feel free to. Again, this is, there's no punishment here in this course. There's no coercion and no forcing, because love does not coerce and love does not force. Love is infinitely patient. Love is patient, love is kind. Paul in Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind. Infinitely so. So, let's just read a little bit and we'll conclude. Well, let's not read that. Let's just say that ultimately this is getting to non-dualism, that there is no other power in the universe. Nothing. There's nothing other than God. the sin would, to say that sin is real, guilt is real, is to say there is some other power that can even overthrow God. And that's crazy talk. And that's where we get issues. I'll just bring up this last thing up because I know I'm on a roll, but I'm on a soapbox too. But last thing here is there was a book called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People by a rabbi. Forgetting his name right now, but this is way back. He wrote this book about 40 years ago or more, maybe 50 years ago. He wrote this book where he said that God actually would like to help, but he's not able to. God would like to end suffering, but he's not able to. His hands are tied. It's a crazy thought, to say that God is not omnipotent. But that's the conclusion this rabbi came to. And Jesus is saying in this passage, he's calling bullshit on that. No, there's no other power. There's only another power if you give it power. Whatever you give power to is true because you've given it power. But if you don't give it power, you're going to see that it's not, you don't have to give it power. It doesn't have power unless you give it power. Anyway, we shall overcome. The obstacles to peace is the next section. I'll see you soon. Thanks so much for listening. Adios.